Alright guys, Eldar Corsair here with another tactics video for 6th edition. This time we're going to look at how to use Dire Avengers in 6th edition. Some of you may have seen my 5th edition Dire Avenger video. This is really just an update to that. I'm not going to delete that video because it has a lot of information that's worth keeping. And I'm going to try to keep this one shorter as a result. And really I'm just going to talk about the changes that we've seen with this unit. Now, just a little overview, these are still a very useful unit in 6th edition. You are going to make them the staple of a lot of your armies if you're continuing to go mechanized, which, contrary to popular opinion, mechanized Eldar armies are not dead, believe me. You just have to build them in a very smart way. Maybe I'll do a separate video about that one day. But, you know, there have been some changes. So let's talk about the good first, and then we'll talk about the bad. On the good side, the game has shifted in 6th edition towards shootiness, towards shooting. Not to say that melee is useless, absolutely not. It's just that shooting has become real linchpin of many armies and of many games because of the fact that you get Overwatch even when things are charging you. So that bodes well for these guys because they can be a very shooty unit. They have the equivalent of like 6-inch shorter range storm bolters, if you will, on them. And you know, they can put out a lot of shots when you factor in stuff like Bladestorm and the Exarch with the extra gun. So, you know, that's a good thing. On another good thing about these guys in 6th edition is that fleet has become a lot more useful for. I don't want to say a lot more useful, but it's become quite a bit more powerful. Even than it was in 5th edition, because that extra ability to reroll dice makes a huge difference when you're charging into something like terrain. In fact, statistical analysis has shown that a unit with fleet charging into terrain, you know, that has that extra dice being thrown away with the high dice, actually charges further on average than a regular unit going into open terrain. That's pretty interesting. That means that fleet is extremely effective at getting melee units into fighting. So if you are going to use these guys for melee, maybe you've got the melee Exarch, they are much more likely to get into melee. Now that's the good. Let's talk about the bad. First of all, units can no longer assault out of vehicles. So, you know, this idea of having the melee Exarch and having Doom going and Fortune and charging out and killing a unit that's on something after you've blasted in the smithereens, that's gone. You can't assault out of these Eldar vehicles anymore. We have no assault vehicles in the army. You know, that's one really big change, is that the melee offensiveness of these guys is really nullified quite a bit. You might still want to take the melee Exarch for defensive purposes, but, you know, the offense there, it's been hurt. You know, what else is bad in 6th edition for these guys? Their range of 18 inches, which was already kind of short in 5th edition, gets hammered even further because those 18 inches mean that you can actually potentially get charged. You know, you move 6 inches in the movement phase, and you can charge up to 12, right, in this new edition. And in fact, if you really think about it, when you unload a unit, if the back line is 18 inches, because their guns have to be within 18, by the time you get to the kind of the front area of guys, that 18 inches might have become 14 inches for the charge, right? So suddenly you go 6 inches, you only need 8 more inches to charge him. That 18-inch range really starts to hurt in 6th edition. It means you are always in danger of being charged at anything you can shoot at. Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean you're going to be consistently charged, right? If you're keeping yourself, you know, 16 inches away, you're bunching together, maybe your opponent doesn't have lots of blasts, so you're cramming yourselves together, you know, and then from front to rear of your ranks, we're talking like 2 inches, then 16 inches, you know, charge of 10 inches, not that likely still, but it is possible. You got to keep that in mind. If you can shoot at something, it has a chance of charging you in 6th edition. That really hurts. And, you know, that's a big deal there. Now, the next big problem these guys face in 6th edition is that you can no longer hold objectives when you're inside a vehicle. That is a serious problem, serious change in 6th edition, because Eldar, of all codexes, most of our stuff is very fragile. I mean, these guys have not a very good toughness, not a very good armor save. They do not like being out on the table because they will lose in a straight up firefight against, you know, Space Marines that are in rapid fire range. I mean, they cannot take hits very well. So the fact that you can't hide inside your vehicle on crucial turns when your opponent might be able to shoot at you, that really hurts. That's a problem. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll have to just change your tactics. It means you can still stay inside the vehicle and then simply get out on turn 5 to start holding objectives. But if that game continues, or if you're the first player, not the second player, your opponent's going to get a turn to shoot at these guys. Blasts really hurt them. Volume of fire really hurts them. It can really be an issue, the fact that you can no longer hold objectives inside a vehicle. Also, a sort of interesting, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bad thing, but it ends up being a bad thing in some ways, is that because of Overwatch, you want to save your Overwatch shooting. If you blade storm to gun something down and you don't gun it down, and you get charged by something hopefully more powerful than these Guardians, you won't be able to Overwatch. So you won't be able to benefit from that 6th edition rule, which really helps shooty units on the turn when you get charged after you've blade stormed. That can really hurt. Now keep in mind, if it's any other turn other than the one that you blade stormed on, you haven't blade stormed yet, that Overwatch is going to really help. It's really going to help you. In fact, you can blade storm on the Overwatch to really give you some options. Maybe if you've guided these guys, that might be able to help you, or if you prescience them or something like that. Or maybe you give them foreboding or something like that, which is, I think, foreboding is unless I'm making the wrong word for that, the one that lets you fire at ballistic skill on Overwatch. So keep that in mind, though. If you do on turns when you blade storm, you're not going to be able to Overwatch. So that's something really important to think about. Now let's talk about one other huge change that arguably is for the detriment of not only Dire Avengers, but almost any unit in Eldar that uses an Exarch to get the unit abilities on. And that is the fact that casualties are taken from the front in 6th edition. You have some guys over here shooting at you. Eldar violence, yet again. Guardians blasting away. Looks like this guy's the first guy in front. He's the leader of your unit. He has all the unit upgrades, all the unit abilities. He has the only specialized gear potentially in the unit. He dies first, unless he can succeed on those 4+ lookout sir rolls. And on top of that, when we're talking about sniper hits, or we're talking about other characters rolling 6s to hit, he can be in the middle of a unit and still be killed by sniper shots that roll 6, or by shots from characters that roll 6. I mean, that's brutal, losing all your upgrades. We're talking an Exarch, when outfitted with everything, with the melee setup, with both powers, is something like 62 points or 60 points or something. I mean, that's brutal to lose that. That does not help Eldar in 6th edition. The fact that, you can have characters shot off or individual models killed, and in Eldar, everything in the aspect unit is inside that Exarch. That really hurts. I mean, what does it mean for you? Now, you can't get away from those sniper hits. Hopefully, if you do take those kind of hits, you can look out, sir. You can, however, set up intelligently with your setups. When I pop a unit out, I often try to have that Exarch generally in the middle of the unit. Do you want to have him at the back of the unit? Well, not necessarily. If your opponent has Deep Strike, your opponent has Deep Strike, that's the juiciest target imaginable. He gets behind you somewhere, kills him with the first shot that needs to go through. No good. What happens if your opponent you put him, not the last one back, but, towards mostly to the back or something? Well, your opponent maybe now has a vehicle that can, zoom around and fire at you, or maybe a flyer comes on the board and shoots this way. Well, look, 1, 2, 3, maybe the 4th is going to kill you. That hurts, but it's better to at least be in the middle of a unit so that no matter what angle the shots come from, they'll have to kill a bunch of guys before they get to your Exarch. Of course, within reason. If your opponent doesn't have a lot of speed or directional mobility and all of his shots are coming from this direction, well then, by all means, go in the back, right? But, you're going to have to use your judgment on that. Keep in mind, though, 6th edition is merciless towards Eldar when it comes to Exarchs and Exarch powers and things. That's going to hurt you. You have to keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about loadouts. In 6th edition, I really like the shooty loadout. So the 2 guns and if you have a full unit or a larger unit, getting Blade Storm on there. Because shooting is a lot more important with these guys. You can't rely on them to be on the field fighting in melee, because, how are they going to get to melee if they can't assault out of their transport? It's not a very common situation. I like the idea of having a shooty guy, and I would go so far as to say is, even if you have small units, if we're talking 6 guys, or we're talking 5 guys even, as you know, in 5th edition, I did not like the minimum 5 Dire Avenger unit. The old Dire Avenger vehicle upgrade that people talk about for vehicles. It's just not worth it for me in most cases. They're going to get gunned down the moment they come out. They can't do a heck of a lot if you do need them to do a little extra shooting. For just a little bit of extra points, you can get an Exarch. So that unit of 5 becomes a unit with an Exarch that has a 3+ armor, extra gun, better ballistic skill, and extra attack and melee. I mean, it's worth it. It's worth it, even just for the shooting capacity that he brings. The fact that he's got a 3+ armor save just adds to it, because a lot of times he'll be the last one to survive. So that's worthwhile for a loadout. That's a worthwhile loadout, is to always take the Exarch with at least the 2nd gun. If you have the points for Blade Storm, it might be worth it on a small unit. I would say it's probably worth it more on a larger unit. But go for that Exarch. The melee loadout that I used to really love in 5th edition, it's still useful. It's just it's not as useful in as many situations as it used to be, because the fact that you can't charge out of that vehicle really hurts you. In 5th edition, not only could you pop out of a vehicle and assault somebody, but if your vehicle got blown up and these guys, half the unit dies but the other half survives and they charge out to go and kill something, that was great. But in 6th edition, if this thing's blown up, these guys can't even charge on that next turn, right? Because of the way the rules work. So it really hurts this setup. If I was going Eldrad in this unit, I would still take the melee setup so that I could get the Shimmer Shield going for those rerollable invulnerable saves on the unit. But melee setup, not my favorite. Now, in terms of the defend power, defend is still one of the most powerful defensive upgrades on any unit in all of 40k. It's pretty unbelievable. The fact that it takes away 1 attack each assault round, not just on the turn your opponent assaults you, but on every turn. I mean, that is incredibly powerful. We're talking, purifiers getting 1 attack in a normal round of combat against you, which you can then, if you do have a melee guy, with a Shimmer Shield, you can then re-roll, potentially with Fortune, or even just on its own, if it gives them a chance to whiff some attacks, and they do not have a lot of attacks coming at you. So you can survive a lot with that. Defend might be quite useful, even on this shooty Exarch with a full unit, depending on the points you have left, depending on your army. It is not sort of the standard upgrade, though, simply because these guys are probably going to get cleaved down in combat anyways. When you're not taking the Power Weapon, Shimmer Shield, and Fortune kind of setup going. So, it's not my first upgrade, but it is still an extremely powerful defensive upgrade on these guys when you take Defend. Now, there is some question as to whether you should use these guys on foot. In 5th edition, I strongly advocated putting them always in a vehicle, like a Wave Serpent or a Falcon. And to be perfectly honest, I still completely advocate that in 6th edition. In my opinion, they're simply not worth putting on the table on foot. They're very expensive when you actually think about it. 12 points each for really terrible armor, really terrible toughness. I mean, that's approaching Space Marine level of cost. Their guns are shorter range. Yeah, they're Assault 2, Strength 4, that's better than most regular Space Marines, but when you're talking 18-inch range and 12-inch range for rapid fire, we're starting to get into very, very close territory, especially given that you can be assaulted potentially at 18 inches. So, their stats do not compare very favorably on foot. When they're hidden inside an Armor 12 vehicle and can pop out at will to gun stuff down, that's not too bad. But when they're on foot and getting blasted by stuff, they are just too easy to kill for the point cost you pay for them, in my opinion. The second thing is their guns are such short range that they are not going to be very useful at shooting at things on foot, personally. I mean, what are you going to use that 18-inch for? Like we talked about, if you're within 18 inches range, you are theoretically capable of being charged. So it's not a great place to be on foot. You know, I really don't know what these guys are going to achieve for you on foot. Whereas at least Guardians have a long-range gun. It's mandatory. They have to come with some kind of long-range gun. Even the cheapest gun, the Shuriken Cannon, it shoots further than these guys. And you know, I don't advocate with Guardians taking a Shuriken Cannon anyways. I prefer having a longer-range gun like a scatter laser or something. But Guardians are actually much, much better on foot. They're way cheaper. You get more bodies for almost the same stats as these guys defensively, especially if we're talking about going to ground and area terrain. Then the stats are identical for only 2/3 the cost. And you get the heavy weapon. You get the option of a Warlock, which opens up some really interesting, weird possibilities. A Warlock can be anti-vehicle. You know, there's if he charges, there's some interesting things. If you want to put troops on foot, that aren't Wraithguard, use these guys. Use not these guys. Use Guardians. You know, I cannot advocate using Dire Avengers on foot. Personally, I do not think they are a good choice on foot. So where does that really leave us? Because, you know, we've got a unit that is nowhere near as effective at charging things in melee and fighting in melee because Doom now needs to always get through a Deny the Witch roll. They can't assault from the outside, from a vehicle that they were starting in. They can't assault if the vehicle they were in is blown up and they're left out in the open. They just have lots of drawbacks going towards them in terms of the melee department. So I would really just say that as much as I hate saying always do this or always do that, I'm not going to say that exactly, but I'm going to say unless you can come up with a really good reason for it, or unless you can, in your own army, you need some different role for them than the shooty version, I would really recommend that at least for the short term now, for the next little while, you stick to using Dire Avengers in a shooty capacity. You go for the extra guns on the Exarch. You focus on Blade Storm and just using them as a mobile, pop in, shoot, and escape type force. That's really what I advocate with these guys in 6th edition. Still a solid troop choice, still okay, but they are starting to show their age now. They were my favorite troop choice in 5th edition. That's not quite the case anymore. I much prefer on foot if we're talking about Guardians, and I prefer jet bikes if we're talking about fast armies. Pathfinders are a whole other can of beans. We can talk about that in a different video. But go for the shooty version if you're not 100% sure. Unless you really know what you're doing and you really know that, for instance, you're throwing Eldrad with these guys, maybe you want to use a Zerman, who's still pretty awesome, then by all means get the melee version. But don't expect a ton out of these guys if you put them on foot. If you just put them slogging across the table on foot, they're not going to achieve very much for you, in my opinion. Alright guys, I hope that was helpful to you, and keep on watching, and there's going to be more of these videos coming along. So keep watching, and see you on the tabletop.